It's the On Stage podcast with Chris Robert. Hello, welcome to another podcast. We have Evangeline Victoria. You can call her Evie if you want. And she's an Australian violinist and violist and entertainer of 20 years. And she's classically trained graduate from the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music. She has embraced performing and improvising within a broad variety of musical genres and has built repertoire and skills to offer a wide range of modern classic styles. Okay, so hello, Evangeline, Evie. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. Can you
Thank you
give us
so
a little
much
bit
for
of
having
backstory?
me.
You're very welcome. Can you give us a backstory of who Evangeline Evie is?
Well, hi, I'm Evangeline. You can call me Evie. There's so much to me, I feel like. So I feel like I was always destined to be a performer and entertainer. Just the way I was brought into a world of wonderful opportunity in the theatre as well as the music space. And I am I guess I'd call myself a wedding and event violinist and entertainer, which is there's a lot of ends in there, but I sort of do a lot of events and live performances as a violinist and an entertainer. I'm from Melbourne in Australia. Yeah, it's cold here. So I live between Melbourne and Brisbane, which is like the coldest state and the hottest state. So I'm between like two of the most extremes in terms of weather. But at the moment in Melbourne, it's starting to warm up a little bit, but it always takes a bit longer here for winter to finish. Whereas in Brisbane, winter finished like the start of June, which is the start of winter. Like it just, winter doesn't feel like winter there at all. So, yeah, but no, otherwise everything's really good. It's been very busy. We're heading into wedding season now. So it's really picking up in terms of work. And this week is like my first very busy week since July. I've got four events this week, so a lot on, but otherwise really good. How's Canada?
Pleased to meet you. Nice to
You
talk
too.
to and see your face at the same time. Canada is okay. Actually, we just had our summer. You don't have your summer until what, September? Oh no, October, November, something like
Summer, yeah. So we're in spring now, so we'll start summer at the start of
that.
November.
Your
I think.
seasons are so messed up.
Your seasons are so messed up. Ours makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm making a mess of this. I'm kind of picking a bit of everywhere. But who I am as a person, I'm Evie. That's who I am. I'm a violinist and entertainer, and I guess it comes out in my personality. And yeah.
And why the violin? Why didn't you choose some other instrument?
So when I was young, so my dad is a musician. He's a pianist, but also plays flute, clarinet, saxophone, and bassoon. And from a young age, both my parents had introduced me to this storybook called the Musical Life of Gustav Mole, as in the mole, like the animal. And it was a cartoon book, and it takes you through his life of living in a musical household, and he decided to learn the violin as he grew up, and then sort of takes you through his whole life. And as I was a young child, I used to read this book a lot, and it came with a cassette, like the cassettes that have two sides to them and you have to rewind them with a pencil. And so we'd listen to the cassette, and it would be that on one side of the cassette, it would have the narration of the book. And then on the other side, it was just the background music. And because we traveled a lot, we'd listen to it in the car, and I'd have the book. And I was exposed to this book so much as a child growing up. And then when I was given the opportunity to start learning an instrument in primary school, which I don't know, do you call it primary school in Canada?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So in primary school, I was given the opportunity to learn an instrument in grade 3, and I chose violin, and I don't know why. Like, I don't remember being or having a moment where I was like, I want to learn the violin. I just think growing up with that storybook, I was exposed to, the violin and in that way. And then I guess it planted a seed. And so when I was given the opportunity, I was like, that's what I want to learn. And I started learning that. Like, you'd think, my dad being a flute, clarinet, saxophone, bassoon, piano teacher. So I started learning violin in primary school and then kind of kept with it. Went to uni. I like kept with it all through primary school and high school, and then when it came to choosing a degree and going to university, I sort of was like, music. Well, I did music theatre and that sort of dance and theatre for a little while, and then I went into the more classical music. So I went into the Conservatorium of Music, and then from there, like, they encouraged us to learn another instrument. So that's when I picked up viola, and I haven't looked back since. I love the violin so much, and I love the opportunity that comes with the violin, and also being a double instrumentalist as a violinist and violist. So that's sort of, there was never really a moment where I was like, that I want to learn the violin because of this. It was always just a seed that was planted, and from there it was like, cool, I'm gonna do that, and it stuck. And I think my parents, my mum's not a musician or performer, but there's elements of that on her side of the family. But my dad being a music teacher, but also a lot of his side of the family are all musicians as well. I think it was the right amount of balance with mum and dad to nurture that side of me. So I was able to continue it growing up. And even though I'd have, those moments where I wanted to give up because it was too hard, or I'd have these challenging times, dad especially was able to nurture me in the right way to be able to keep me going. And then I sort of just rode that wave, and here I am now, full-time violinist, which is so rewarding.
Is there a specific type of violin that you prefer, or can you handle all types of violins? Because I noticed that some are like made differently. They don't look like violins. They look like sort of like the outline and the empty inside.
Yeah. So those ones are electric violins, the ones that
Yep.
don't look like your classical violin. Electric violins they're good. Like, I think there's a time and a place for all different types of instruments. When I'm doing live performances, I use a semi-acoustic. So what a semi-acoustic is it has the elements of an acoustic instrument where you can still hear it without needing amplification, but it can also be used as an electrical instrument. And I preferred that. And the reason why I went for that instrument is because the style of work that I do, I could be in an outdoor setting, or I can be in a massive room in a massive Lebanese wedding with 600 plus people. And, there's so much noise in the room, and I want to be able to hear the instrument through my jaw, in my ear, right at my ear, without having to use in-ears. So when you have that acoustic sound, it can still be electrified, but you've still got that acoustic sound in your ear right by you. So if something were to go wrong, if you don't have fold back, if you don't have in-ears, I'm still able to hear myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Whereas, then you've got your classical instruments, which is like your traditional instrument or traditional violin that everyone is familiar with. And, you can still, in a way, electrify them. You can still amplify them using like a pickup, which is good. It's fine, but there's always a better option rather than just using a pickup. An acoustic instrument is meant to be acoustic, and if you start adding things onto it and installing pickups and that sort of thing, it can interfere with the sound and the quality. So I think for me, like, I can use any instrument, like I can play any violin. Some I will prefer more than others, but in like an acoustic setting, I love my traditional violin. It's a French Chipotle. It's a beautiful instrument. It was handmade and hand varnished in 1901 in France. And then my semi-acoustic, which is a spur made by a good friend of mine, Paul Davies, who's here based in Australia, and he's created these really unique semi-acoustic instruments that have gone incredibly well internationally. So the US has just picked them up, and they're really producing them like crazy. And I'm very lucky that Paul, who made my instrument, he is the partner of one of my former violin teachers, and he also lives just 30 minutes up the road. So I was very lucky to be a part of the process as it was being built. I'd visit the violinery, every couple of weeks. I got to sign my instrument on the inside of it before they assembled it. It's really rewarding to be a part of, but it's very interesting how they make that instrument, because it's so different from an acoustic instrument and then an electric instrument. It's that middle ground. So yeah.
Do you have a favorite violin piece that you like to perform?
Oh, you're asking a Gemini to make a decision. I struggle to have one single favorite. I think there's, I have my days where I will love to play one style of music, and then another day where I like to play something else. So I don't know. I think like there's just no answer to it. Like I love playing all music, and like you mentioned, I play all genres. So I go from classical to like I can play classical in a ceremony for a wedding, and then go to the reception and play usher, or there's a lot of pop stuff that I play, or music theater. I adore Andrew Lloyd Webber work. I'm a big fan of the Phantom of the Opera, and I went and saw that at the Sydney Opera House here in Australia this week. So it was, that really I've just gone down a rabbit hole of learning a whole lot of music from that, and the violin part from that. So it's all very circumstantial in terms of what particular piece I love. Sorry, that's a very long-winded, non-direct answer to your question. I just don't have a favorite. I love all music. That's why I do what I do.
So what do you prefer? You like playing weddings, or do you prefer playing live events, or are they the same thing?
They're kind of the same. They're the same but different. So I think I love weddings, and that's the reason why I started my business. It was always I very much directed it towards the wedding space more, because my love for this industry came from a love for music and storytelling, and telling a love story through the music, and building that relationship and seeing people on the happiest day of their life as well. I think there was so much to it. So, like if I was to do a corporate function, it's, in all honesty, like there's just not that emotional connection to it. Whereas weddings, there's so much emotional connection. I've spent months with my couples, building a relationship with them, learning their story, learning their style of music, getting to know them. And so when it comes to the wedding day, like I get so excited still, getting to a wedding day, and being there for my couple, who have now become really good friends of mine, and telling their story through music. So I'd have to say like weddings are my favorite, and that sort of live performance. But I don't know, it depends. Like there's something special about every event, and I really try to find that uniqueness, and that what is special about each event, as I go along. But weddings I adore for so many reasons, and I think because it just connects with me on another level.
Or how about a 50th anniversary? Do you ever get called to play for them as well? The
Yeah.
private function?
Yeah, so I get a lot of weddings, but I get a lot of different things as well. So every corporate function is so different. And actually, I did a corporate function in Brisbane a couple of months ago, and to be honest, I don't actually know what the occasion was, because I only performed for the opening as on guest arrival. But I was also a supporting artist. Do you know Dami Im, the Eurovision winner? Was that a yes?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I got to perform alongside her, and the level of production they have with that entertainment and that performance. It was just like none other. It was so much fun. I got to dress up and I had to sit on the bar and I got to perform all these, like wonderful songs, like a big mixture of things as people came in. And it was another level of entertainment and production. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that performance. It was so cool. And it was really cool to meet Dami as well. She's incredibly talented and such a beautiful person too. So that was really cool. So every corporate function is very different, but I think I'd have to say that was my favorite one. Shh, don't tell the others.
What's the upkeep of your violin? Do you use rosin like all the other violinists?
Yeah. So without rosin, you won't have any sound. So the rosin goes on the hairs of the bow, and that creates that grit and the grip for the string to vibrate. So whenever if I get a new bow, or if I get my bow rehaired, and I haven't put rosin on it, there'll be no sound. But so rosin is an absolute must for any string player, and there's different rosins out there. And to be honest, I think I use a cello rosin because it's just a little bit more grittier. And for what I do, I don't need to use as much of it either. So it just like every instrumental, every musician's different with what they like. But in terms of upkeep, changing strings, I should change them every 6 months, but I tend to forget because 6 months goes by so quickly. So I change them like a minimum once a year. And I always have like spare strings on me. I always try to keep it clean. I never touch it with, dirty or oily hands or anything like that. I never let anyone who isn't me touch it. And, just making sure that it's kept in a really good neutral temperature, so it's not too hot, not too cold. My spur, the semi-acoustic violin, that one is very, very sensitive to temperature because it's made of a different wood compared to a traditional violin. It's made of cedar wood, so it's a softer wood, and it will go out of tune much quicker. So if I were to tune it in a cool room and then go into a hot room, it'll go out of tune straight away. So generally I have to tune it in the room that I'm performing in and try and keep it in there for a live performance, which isn't too hard generally for like a wedding or anything like that. But yeah, in terms of upkeep, like they're pretty low maintenance, in all honesty. It's not like there's obviously I clean the rosin off it after each session, but it's not like a wind instrument where you have to, I feel like you have to do plumbing on every single part of on a wind instrument, like the flute. They have to like clean it all out and everything. Like I just don't have the patience for that. So I'm grateful I chose the violin. But in terms of upkeep, it's all pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Do you replace the strings on your own, or do you have to take the violin into a professional to do it?
Yeah, so I do it all myself. I think like on some instruments, it depends. Like the first time I had my spur strings, the semi-acoustic, redone because it's slightly made differently. I had my luthier, he took me through how to do it properly without, because it's all very different. But one of the first, like early days, not the first thing, but in early days when I started learning, my teacher was really good at teaching me how to change my strings, because it's important to know, like you never know when a string's going to break or whenever you need to change a string, and you might not have the flexibility or the availability to go into a place to get it done for you. So it's important, especially like, I mean, I don't teach, but if you're a violinist and you decide to teach, like you have to teach, your students have to be able to do it as well. So to be as self-sufficient and in that sense, to be able to do it yourself is really important. But I learned how to change my strings very early on. It's just a bit annoying with them because it takes a while for them to settle.
What do you do when a string breaks during a performance?
Touch wood, I have never had that happen to me. I'm sure it will one day. I've had strings unravel. So the way that strings are wound, the material, and it depends on the string. Some of them are made of gold, aluminium, silver. It's all different, but generally the A string, which is the most common string to unravel, that one started to unravel, and that it doesn't break because it's just the it's not the string itself, it's like the coating. But when it starts to unravel, that's usually the time to change, because that's when it starts to cut your fingers, because it's like very sharp. But yeah, I haven't yet had a string break, but I know people who have, and honestly, I'm terrified of it happening one day, because I just worry about my eyes. Like, what if it flings back in my eye? Just touch wood, it never happens.
So maybe you should prepare yourself in case it does happen, what you would do, you know?
Yeah, just wear glasses, like goggles.
That's a very interesting story. What do you think makes your violin so extraordinary?
It's got a personality. Every instrument, it's like how every human being is different. They're all extraordinary in their own way. When with my traditional violin and my spur, both of them, I believe, chose me. So it's a bit like in Harry Potter, where the wand chose Harry. It's a very similar thing with the violin. So with my traditional violin, my Chippewa Voyant, I tested 30 violins in one day. I did blind testing. It was hours long. I was there with my parents, because it was when I was still in high school. So I was there with my parents, and we were just testing violins, and I did a blind test. So I had another violinist who was there at the violinery, who was playing the violins to me, and we had to narrow it down from 30 down to 20, down to 10, down to 7, down to 5, down to 3, down to 2, and we eventually narrowed it right down. And it was such a grueling process. Like, it was such a long day. And my dad, being a musician, he understood it was going to take a while. My mum, by the end of the day, she was like, this better be worth it, because that was too long. She just didn't quite get it. But to be honest, like, a process that grueling was so important, because I've had that violin for over a decade now, and it's a part of me. It's my baby. It was a similar situation with the spur. So the spur, the way that Paul creates the spurs and makes them in the violinery is he makes them in batches of 10. So he'll make 10 violins in one go. Wow. And then I chose, so because Paul was very big on like the look of it as well, and making sure that I was attracted to the violin in a more like a visual sense. So they all have, because cedar wood is very unique depending on the wood where it's from and that sort of thing, and they all tell a story. And so they all had a different design on them, and they all looked a little bit different, with the color and the shading and all that sort of thing. So from 10 covers, so the top of the violin, 10 of them I narrowed down to 3, and I was able to choose 3, and then I signed them. And then when he finished making them, he left me alone in a space at the violinery, and I picked up, actually the first one I picked up was the one that I chose, and I played it, and I was just playing it for I think for an hour.
Wow.
And then I picked up the second one after an hour's time. I picked it up and I just didn't like it at all. I barely played it for a minute. I didn't like it at all. I put it back down, and I tried the last one. I played that one for about 10 minutes, and I was like, I'm not happy with this one either. And I came back to the original one, and it was almost like the sound had become more warm since I'd put it down. It spoke to me, and I was like, that's the violin, that like it chose me. And like, it's even like that chemistry you have with the instrument. And I know that sounds really bizarre, but the way you feel when you're playing it as well, like you have that chemistry, you find that connection. It's how it speaks to you. And yeah, I think like that's why like they have their own story. I was there for as my spur was being made, but the story that my Chippewa Voyant has, like it was made like almost a century before I was born. The stories it would have, and the stories it has within itself, and the way it's, if it's weathered in any way, the way it's lived through those hundreds of 100+ years, it has a story to it as well. And I think that's what comes out in the sound. And of course there's like the way it's been serviced over those years as well. Like they all have a very unique sound, even the way that they're made as well. Just like the tiniest minuscule change in sizing of the bridge or the placement of the fingerboard or anything like that, it makes a big difference to how it feels to the player. So they have their very unique, they're both very unique instruments within their own category, but also towards each other as well.
If you hadn't shared this with me, I would have thought that all violins are the same, but apparently they're not.
They're not.
So what about the viola? Did you have the same feeling towards the viola?
So the viola was actually specially customized, tailored made to me. So one challenging thing, so the viola is a slightly larger violin. And rather than having the strings G, D, A, and E, it's instead down a fifth, so C, G, D, and A. So you're missing that upper A string. And the viola sits between the violin and the cello in terms of range. With the viola, because it's a larger instrument, when you're going between a violin and a viola, it can be like you have to change the way you play in a way, and the way you with your fingers, you have to stretch a bit more to be able to reach the note. So because it's a larger instrument, the intervals are further apart. Now, when I started learning viola, I was doing a lot of productions and a lot of performances where I was booked as a violinist and violist. So I had to play both instruments within one performance or one show. And transitioning between the two instruments was very confusing. It was like there was a lot of intonation problems because I was going from like this small instrument to a large instrument, and I don't have a lot of turnaround time to like figure out, like, for my brain to register that I've got a different instrument in my hand, and it's a very quick turnaround. So it made it quite challenging. And I was very lucky enough. My violin teacher at the time had a good friend who's a luthier for violas. She makes violas. And so she made my viola. And my viola's name is Lily. And it's a shorter but fatter instrument. So from the scroll to the bass, it's shorter. So it's much closer to the size of a violin. Not exactly the same size. It's still a little bit bigger, but much closer to what a traditional viola would be. But then it's fatter at the sides. And the reason why she made it fatter is because I still wanted to get that full sound that I would get if it was a full-size viola, or full-size, or like a traditionally sized shaped viola. And she created this wonderful, wonderful instrument. And she even found the wolf note, which is a note that sort of, I don't know how to explain it. The wolf note is like a dead note. So she found it and she was able to stop it with a little magnet. And that instrument in itself, like, it was made for me. So, like, again, it didn't choose me. I didn't choose it. It was sort of made for me, and it was always the most perfect instrument for me. But I don't play Lily very often. Simply because people don't book me as a violist, they book me as a violinist. But I have gone on some tours where I've used the viola, and she's a beautiful instrument. She creates a really warm, full tone, and she is a really beautiful instrument. But to be honest, I always prefer playing violin. I shouldn't say that too loud.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I like how passionate you are about talking about different instruments and naming your viola Lily. Did you name your violin too?
Yeah. So Lily she came with her name. It's so bad I can't remember the name of the luthier, but she when she gave me Lily, she was like, her name's Lily. So it was on, I want to say it was like the viola's birth certificate. It has the name of it. My Shippo Voyom, Shippo is spelled Chipot. So it's a French name. And then Vuillaume is Vauillame, I think. So it's a very French name. And when people would like say the name of Chipot Vuillaume, they'd pronounce it like Chipot Valium. And it was just like this boganized Aussie way of saying it. And it always made me laugh. And because my Chipot Vuillaume is very like, it's a lot more expensive and very very precious and very like delicate and just such a beautiful instrument. I thought it would be ironic to call it Chippy, like Chippo, like narrowed down to Chippy, which is such an Australian thing to do. So that name kind of stuck. I've had other violins in the past that I've had much better names for, like Fidelio and Big Red. Big Red was like my first full size violin, and he was red, like in the violin color sense. But Schipper is Chippy, and then my spur. So I spent a lot of time thinking of a name for my spur, but I called her Siren. And the reason why I called her Siren is named after the Greek mythological creature. So sirens in Greek mythology, in my understanding, they're like mermaids. So they look like human beings, but they're not. And they really draw people in with their song, and they lure people in with their music. And I'm pretty sure they're evil, but I didn't make that connection with my violin. But the reason why I called her Siren is because she looks like a traditional violin, but isn't really. And she lures people in with her music and her song. And I felt like everything about her also said that the name needed to start with S. And then Siren came up, and I was like, that's the name. And so when Paul, my luthier, said, like, what are you going to name her? And I said Siren, he got very jealous that he didn't think of it first. He was like, that is so brilliant. But yeah, he was mad. He didn't think of it first. He's like, I will pay you a lot of money to buy it off you. And I was like, no, this is my name. But yeah, I name all of my instruments.
I noticed that there are several different sizes of violins to the smallest, which is like they had this violinist on YouTube, and he took all the different sizes of violins and were playing them, and each one had a different sound to it. So the smallest violin, which was like about an hand's large, he started playing, and it made this like sort of sound, and it was kind of interesting. And we had a guest on named Natasha Jaffe, and she played the cello. What do you think of the cello? Do you have any experience with that?
I've had one experience with the cello, and I just could not even hold it up. It was just too heavy for me. And that's a cello. That's not even a double bass. Double bass is even bigger. Like, I don't even know how people play the double bass. I would just be crushed underneath it. But the cello, I think cellos are such a beautiful instrument, and I love the sound. And maybe in another life I might learn the cello, but at the same time I'm also very grateful I didn't, because carrying a violin around is much easier. But the cello is just so beautiful, and I think because it's a bigger instrument, you get that deep, rich sound, and I love that in a stringed instrument. Especially like if you can get a violin with that a deep, rich sound, it's really special. But it's hard to achieve being a smaller instrument. But I think the cello is just such a beautiful instrument, and yeah, with the different sizes, because the body of the instrument, that's where, oh my goodness, you have a cat.
Yeah, that's Hannah.
Hi, Hannah.
She loves it when I do a podcast because she wants to be on the podcast herself. Hannah.
I'm surprised my little cat hasn't jumped up. She always jumps up on my lap when I have a meeting with clients. Her name's Mina, but I don't know where she is.
That's very
um,
interesting. Yep.
Yeah, but no, I think like with the smaller the instrument, the less body it has, so it's unable to create a full sound. So that's why you get these little tiny kid instruments, and they're like the student instruments, the tiny, like 16th of a violin, and they're like that squeaky sound. Not my favorite, but I started with a small instrument like that, and yeah, I'm very glad I graduated to a much more nicer professional sounding violin.
So depending on what you're doing, a wedding or a corporate party or something like that, Do you have sort of like a repertoire?
Yeah. So I've got a repertoire that I offer to clients of over like 200 songs,
Wow.
and most of them are very, very like modern songs. Pardon me. Yeah, like because I honestly, one of the most common requests I get is, play like the music in Bridgerton. Um, and it's, yeah, my repertoire, but it ranges from everything. So I started with a lot of classical stuff, and then I just followed what the market needed. So more like pop music, and like now I work with DJs and DJ bands as well. So that's where I'm playing like, Usher and Drake, and like, upbeat stuff, like, your party tracks and house music. And yeah, but my repertoire sort of, it ranges a lot, from classical to anything really. I believe that there's a space for violin in any genre. The only genre I really stay away from is like heavy metal. It's not my cup of tea. And generally, like, I haven't had any clients who want that at their wedding, which is kind of good. But if someone does want that at their wedding, I don't think I'm the violinist for them.
So do you actually know these 200 songs off by heart, or
Yeah.
oh wow.
All of them
Amazing.
memorized. I've become very familiar with the music. And, sometimes if I don't play a song for a little while, if it hasn't been requested, or I just haven't found a place for it in a while, like, I'll just have to revisit it. But it doesn't take me long to learn a song or learn any music. I can read sheet music. And when I first started my business, I would arrange every single song, in a program called Soleil. So I'd have my own sheet music and everything. And that was fine, except I realized that it was sort of not the style of performance I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to perform out and interact with guests at a wedding or an event, and not stand behind a music stand. So I sort of cut that level out, where I stopped arranging music, and I started, like, I use sheet music for some things to figure out the key more than anything, but most of the time I can learn things by ear. And when I learn it by ear, I just have a better chance of memorizing it as well, because I haven't relied on the notes on the page to memorize. But all of the music, even the things that I started with on sheet music, I've memorized them very quickly as well, which I'm kind of grateful that I have that skill, because it saves a lot of time and gives my clients the opportunity to make last minute decisions about what they want to walk down the aisle to or have their first dance to.
When you started your business, how many songs did you go into this business, or did you have to learn all 200 and then start your business?
So when I first started, I think I had like maybe 10 or 15 songs. So I only started my business in April last year.
Oh,
And it was for, I had the epiphany to start my business in April last year. I started the actual business in November. But in April last year, I was preparing. I've never had any trouble saying that word before. Preparing like my repertoire for a friend's wedding. And it was in prepping for her wedding that I realized I can use backing tracks and that sort of thing. But I already had 10 to 15 songs already that I'd had from like playing in duets and quartets and that sort of thing from ages ago. And then from there, I sort of started to build my repertoire. So over time, I set the goal, because this was last year, and I live in Melbourne, so this is the most locked down city in the world during COVID. So I think we hit our, maybe fifth or sixth lockdown last year. And every time we went into a lot of mini lockdowns. So every time we went into lockdown, I'd spend like a lot of time building my repertoire and trying to get it. And I think I set the goal by the end of August to have 100 songs on my repertoire list, which I worked hard for, and I got there eventually. And then when weddings start, so we came out of lockdown at the start of November. And then from there, I started getting a lot more weddings, a lot more song requests. And so every time someone would request a song, I would, add that to my repertoire. And I still do that now. So every time someone has a song they'd like me to play for their wedding day, I'll make sure that I add it to my list, because, someone else might request it as well. Unless it's a song that's like not very common or very unique, or I don't see it being requested again.
So is it just regular pop music? You don't play like classical hits, I guess.
I do some of them.
Like, an old girl group called Bond. So
They're
I
amazing.
like this.
They did the theme for Johnny English with Ron Atkinson.
Yeah. A lot of the songs that you know are basically, well, you have classical, pop rock, folk, Celtic. What's klezmer? Can you give us a little bit of
Klezmer
yeah.
is like a mix between folk and it's like a style of folk. Do you know, being in Canada, I'd assume you would. Do you know Cirque du Soleil?
I know Cirque du Soleil, yeah, but I'm not familiar with all the songs.
So a lot of their music is very klezmer, and that's where I grew up going to Cirque du Soleil shows, and I have quite a few friends in the circus industry as well, and have performed with NIDA and Cirque du Soleil performers in the past as well, and the music that we got to learn, it's very klezmer, and I don't know why I fell in love with it so much. I think it was because I love Cirque du Soleil. I love their shows. I love the music. I think there's just something next level about it that really captivated me when I was quite young. But klezmer's it's very like, I don't know how to describe it. It's very unique. It's so unique. It's like folksy, but it's like all the rules you know about music are like thrown out the window. It's all very contemporary folk. I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of yeah, it's almost, no, I wouldn't say it was close to Celtic, but yeah, it's very abstract folk. Let me have a look. Oh, some people say it's like a bit Jewish. Try and play this one for you. Kind of like that.
Nope, never heard of that one.
Oh, I haven't heard of this. That's just a random one. I'll try and find something actually from Cirque du Soleil that you might know, or you wouldn't. You might not know the song, but it'll give a good idea of what the style of music is. I think it's in Kidam. Where is it?
Okay, I found the song I was looking. Carl Jenkins, Palladio Concert. You ever heard of Era Malakian?
No, not that I know of.
That's a great one, huh?
Yeah, I like it. I've never heard of it, but I like it a lot.
If that's something you could play, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Content.
I've got a song for you. This is klezmer.
No.
That's a klezmer song, and that's one of my favorite songs from. It's one of the Cirque du Soleil shows called Barakai, and that took me back. I haven't listened to that in such a long time, but that's probably the best way of me describing what klezmer is.
I would love to have learned the violin because playing hits like that one by Aaron Malikian, he's one of the most famous violinists next to Pinchas Zuckerman. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. So one thing about me is that I'll know someone by their face, or I'll know a song by listening to it. Names of things, I never know the names of them. I never know like it could be a song that I'm so familiar with, but unless I've actually actively gone and remembered the name of the song, if you name drop, I won't know.
Wow, that's amazing. Just having 200 songs in your repertoire and probably moving up. That's really amazing because one day someone's going to say, "Can you play?" And you're like, "No, but I'll learn it so that I can play it
Yeah.
one day."
Yeah,
Because
and that's the thing. I love it when people request songs because I'm like hit me with anything. I want to learn it.
has anybody actually asked you to play a certain song that was in your repertoire, or do you have a
Yeah,
lot
all
of
the
time
time.
where? Oh, really?
All the time it happens. People are like, "Can you play this when I walk down the aisle?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, I know that one." I think one of the most common ones, like "Can't Help Falling in Love." It really astounds me when people think that I don't know how to play that one. I think it was the first one I learnt when I started doing it at weddings and that sort of thing. It's a very, very popular song.
What is your routine before performance?
Okay, so my routine is it's long. Or not really long. Okay, so I spend 2 hours getting ready, and it's not just hair and makeup. I do my own hair and makeup for everything, but I also, it's like my checklist of making sure I've got everything to go, making sure that all of the music that I'm playing, all my tracks are uploaded onto a USB, a Google Drive, and my spare phone, so that if I'm, if one doesn't work, the other ones will. So there's always a way around it. Then I always make sure I've got all my equipment, make sure I've got my violin, spare strings, both my bows as well, because one bow is always ready to get a rehair when the other one's not. So I always make sure I've got all of those. I pack my car. I then do my hair and makeup, get my dress ready, everything like that. And then on the way to I'll do like a quick warm up before I head off as well. So on my violin, but then on the way to my gig, and this is a bit of an ongoing, it's becoming very popular with my followers on Instagram. I do car karaoke. So I pick a song on the way to my gig and I'll just do a bit of car karaoke just to get myself into a good mood, high energy. If I've had a terrible day or something like that, I don't want to take that with me to work. So I always make sure I throw on a good song, whatever I'm feeling. It can be anything. And this is it's a true testament to how expansive my taste in music is, because one day I could be listening to, Look at Me Now by Chris Brown, which is like a heavy rap song, and then the next day will be like opera. So it could be anything, whatever I feel like on the day. So I have my car karaoke, and then I always get to a gig ideally 1 hour before. So I bump in around 1 hour before performance time, or guest arrival at least. And that gives me enough time to bump in. That also gives enough time for sound technicians and DJs to have set up before I get there. So I'm not waiting for them to set up, and they don't feel like I'm pressuring them or anything like that. And then, and then sound check and we're good to go. It's a long process, but it's all part of my routine. And I always try to make sure that, I look after my health and my well-being before I start getting ready as well. So, getting to the gym, doing a bit of exercise. So I'm in a good mental space as well. And just being uber organized too. So I don't, less room for stress, and I can just enjoy the night or enjoy the event.
Do you have a violin handy? I'd like you to show us a proper way of using it.
I do. Let me get it. 1 second. I'm all tangled up in my microphone. Woo! I think this will be my semi-acoustic.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
So this is my spur. I've left my bows are in my other case, so they're downstairs. But this is the semi-acoustic. So we've got the volume knob here. It's it looks like a traditional instrument, but it's slightly different. Yeah. This is much thinner, and we've got a black laminate back as well.
Is it heavy?
No, this is much lighter than a traditional violin. Much lighter. I think because it's just a lighter wood in general, and also much lighter, thinner as well. So most violins tend to be a bit thicker, but this one's quite thin. Yeah.
What's the proper way of putting it under your neck?
So just placing
Okay.
it. So we've got the shoulder rest here, and
Oh, yeah.
I've got a lot of height on the shoulder, just so I'm not having to crunch my neck down too much.
That's pretty good.
Oh, my shoulder rest always pops off as well.
I like the look of it.
Yeah, she's a very good looking one.
Are the bows still bow hairs? Are they still made with horses'
Horsehair, yeah. So
Yeah.
bow hairs are still horsehair. The strings are no longer made with, or you can still get gut strings, but they're generally just made of like a metal rather than gut strings, because they create a very different sound as well. It's not as bright, and they're more traditional for like Baroque instruments.
So, what do you think makes a good violinist? I hear that superior hearing, sensitivity for sound quality, intonation, natural way of hearing, feeling, understanding the musical implications of harmony. What do you think?
I think that is a very subjective question. Like it depends. Like, you know, being technically perfect is great, but it depends what you mean by a good violinist. You know, you can be technically perfect, and then but you can also be like very boring to watch, or vice versa. Like, okay, so I'm not the most technically perfect violinist. I was very clearly told that through uni as well, that I didn't have what it takes to be a technically perfect violinist. That was never really my goal. I'm here to perform and entertain. And, you know, like, I'm not a terrible violinist. Like, I wouldn't be a professional violinist if I was a terrible violinist, but I'm not technically perfect. And I'm not, you know, I'd still work towards getting things technically right, but I don't, you know, I'm not fussed if I get something quite like a bit wrong, because I'm about entertaining and performing. And a lot of the time my audience, they're not musicians, which it doesn't matter anyway. As long as I entertain them, I make them feel good. That's what my purpose is. But like, if you're talking about like a you know, the perfect violinist, which doesn't exist, you know, they'd have that technical perfection, they'd have musicality, they'd be able to perform as well, because music is an art form, and being able to perform it as well is like, that's a skill within itself. Anyone can pick up a violin and learn how to play it, but, you know, like, I can't even tell you how many times I've gone to an orchestral performance and I've fallen asleep because it's like, it sounds beautiful, but it's boring to watch. Whereas I love watching someone who can entertain as well. Yeah. Don't tell my dad that, because he was in one of the orchestras that I fell asleep, but my mum also fell asleep, so it wasn't so bad because it wasn't just me. But it was beautiful to listen to. And this is the thing, like, it is beautiful to listen to, but, you know, if you're watching it as well, you want to be able to be entertained as well. But I think that's a very it depends who answers the question, like, and who asks it as well, like what that means. But to me, I'm big on performance as well as that musicality and you know, the intonation, all that sort of thing. But they're all tiny little things. Like, they're all small things. I think as long as you have musicality, and whatever that means to you, you know, it's important you can play the notes, but can you be musical with it? And you can be musical, that's great, but can you perform it? And can you know, make that violin a part of you, and really, you know, be all in one being. Like, you're not just a person holding a violin and playing it, you're one being, and you're performing, and that's where you have that connection. That's what I think a good violinist is.
I also know, you know, the 3 facts about the violin. One of them is it's been roughly around for 500 years. And playing the violin burns approximately 170 calories per hour. So you have to play an hour in order to do that. And
Well, I mean, I run around, and when I perform, I'm very active, so I wouldn't be surprised if I burn a few more.
violins are typically comprised of spruce or maple wood. So can you tell us, Evie, what the skills are needed to be a successful violin player?
Do you mean as a musician, or also like outside of the musicianship?
Um,
Well, I can still somewhat answer it. I think to be a successful violinist, making sure that you have the discipline to continue working on your craft and understanding that it's always going to be a work in progress, and that's what it's going to be in any skill. Like building a skill is always going to be a work in progress because there's always room to improve, and there's always, like skills don't just stay put. You can lose a skill if you don't work on it, and if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So I think having the discipline to continue, good practices in within your work and making sure that you continue to work hard at your craft, I think is really important. But within that as well, I think we're going to have a little visitor shortly. My little kitten's going to come and say hello. Also, just making sure that you put yourself out there as well. So you can be a good musician. She might purr very loudly into the microphone. Mina, say hi.
Aw, what
Mina.
a sweetie.
This is Mina. We're going to stretch. She
She
purrs very loud. So, and because I've got the microphone right here, she might purr into it. So if that does happen, let me know and I'll get her off my lap.
I noticed that everyone seems to have a cat these days.
I know, because they're just the best. She was the product of a lockdown. We adopted her during lockdown, and she was just the biggest blessing on our lives. And she's like, I think she's like part puppy in her heart. Like she behaves like a dog sometimes. So we got the best of both worlds. Yeah. So being a successful violinist, not only having the skill of playing violin well, but knowing how to put yourself out there and be confident and network and meet people and look for those opportunities to put yourself out there. Like before last year, no one knew that I was a violinist. I was working in the fitness industry. I was, like only people who knew me growing up knew that I was a violinist because I didn't really do anything with it. And then last year, out of nowhere, like I decided to start a business in April. I started actioning that in May. And then by November, I'd started my business. I started weddings in November and I'd gone full time with it in December. And
Wow.
I did 18 weddings in 2 months, like finishing the year last year. This year I've booked, so this is my first, I've still not completed my first year of business. I will next month, but I've booked 70 weddings this year, not including corporate functions, proposals, other events, only weddings. I've booked, what did I say, 70? 70 weddings. And like, that's because I put myself out there and out of nowhere. Like I started a new Instagram page. I started a new website. I put myself out there. I met people. I network with people. And it's about like knowing how to put yourself out there and try new things and being opportunist as well. So, if something like, unless it's like puts you in danger, like nothing, if it's scary, just say yes to it. Try new things, take on challenges and learn from your mistakes and fail forward. I think that's what makes a successful violinist. I know so many people I went to uni with who much more talented violinist than me. Oh my goodness, I was the bottom of the barrel, like the least talented person in my year, but I knew how to put myself out there and I knew how to take risks and fail forward and not be afraid of failure. Failure is it's taught to us from a young age that it's a bad thing. It should be taught to us as a good thing, because as children, when we fail something, we don't know that it's embarrassing to fall over. Like we're just learning how to walk. It's the same thing, like embarrassment and that sort of thing is taught to us. So learning how to, fail forward and put yourself out there and try new things and understand that the only way you fail is if you give up. But yeah, there's many people that I went to uni with who haven't been able to find the work that they wanted to do because they don't know how to put themselves out there. And, they're too afraid to fail. They want to succeed immediately. And it's hard. It's very hard to achieve that. No one in business or no one in their career, like any successful career, knows that it's smooth sailing like that. And if you have had a smooth sailing career like that, you've been denied the opportunity to grow and learn from your mistakes, So in terms of what makes a successful violinist, it's the same thing as what makes a successful mechanic or a successful businessman. It's always working on your craft and learning from that and growing and always aiming to improve and not just want to sit still. It's about moving forward, but also knowing how to put yourself out there and learn from your mistakes and that sort of thing. That's my long-winded answer.
That's a great answer. I love it. If I want to be a violin player, what accessories do I need?
I think the accessories, like other than the violin and the bow, you don't need anything fancy. Like you can just start with the violin. But what actually, like in the more literal sense, comes with the violin, you've got your violin, which has everything it needs on it, and then you've got a shoulder rest, which is what sits the violin between your chin and your shoulder, and it makes it a lot more comfortable. There's plenty of violinists out there that don't use shoulder rests. I think they're a very rare breed of human. I don't know how they do it. I couldn't. And then you've got your bow as and your rosin. But other than that, you don't they're the more basic things and the more essential things. But in regards to all the other fancy bits and pieces, like a fancy case. Oh, you should probably have a case for your violin, but all the fancy bits and pieces, I didn't get all the fancy stuff until way down the track when I needed them. You just need the violin to be able to start learning how to play the violin, and maybe a teacher that helps.
So what is the difference between a fiddle and a violin?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know the actual answer to it, but in my understanding, I think it's not so much the actual instrument. I think it's the way it's played. That's what my understanding is. Whether or not there's actually an instrument out there called the fiddle and it has a minuscule difference to a violin. But I think it's just the way they're played in terms of fiddling rather than playing violin. Fiddling is more referred to in that folksy sense, but there's violinists who hold it down their arm rather than on their shoulder, and that's like that sort of really Celtic folksy fiddling way. But yeah, I think it's just the way it's played. I think it's just another name for a violin.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, so if someone comes up to you and says, I want to learn to play the violin, what's the first thing I need to know?
That they've chosen the right instrument.
Like you did?
Yeah.
20, what was it, 20 of them before you came up with one?
What was that? Sorry?
What was that? You tried 20 or so of them before you found the one you wanted?
Goodness. 30 instruments I tried.
30,
that
yeah.
was when I transitioned. I still had a series of instruments leading up to that moment, but yeah, it was a long process. If they want to start learning, I think pointing them in the right direction of someone that can help them and teach them. I was so fortunate to have the teachers that I did when I started. I started with a teacher. Her name was Louise Ray, and she's an incredible violinist, and she just nurtured the right amount of technical and performance side of the instrument to get me started. And my next teacher after that was Jeanette Stoll. She was very big on performance and trying new things, and she got me into the improvisational part of it as well. She was also very good with the technical side, but she really nurtured that performance side and the experimental side. And then I moved on to Trish, and Trish had she was very even with the technical side of things and the performance side, but also repertoire. And then I moved on to John Noble, who is he's the chairman of the educational program through Orchestra Victoria. He is an uncle to me. I have so much love for him, and he's nurtured all of those little bits into the right way, growing to the person I am now. And I just have so much love for John. He gave me so much opportunity. I've worked with Orchestra Victoria in the educational area for I think over a decade, and they're there's so much opportunity there. But I think education for me was one of the biggest parts of what got me to where I am now. It's less about the actual instrument that you play and just making sure that you have the education nurtured in the right way to encourage you, and not because I never felt, I mean, I had my moments, but I never felt that I was like overwhelmed by what I had ahead of me. I just had like the right people at the right time, nurturing that. Wow, how many times can I say nurturing in a sentence? Really just helping me at the right time to push me forward and keep me motivated and keep me learning and yeah, I'd say like education. That would be like the first place I'd point someone into, and helping them find a good teacher. Making sure that they find a teacher that is like they resonate with as well.
What kind of violin would you recommend to a child if they wanted to start playing? The colored ones? How good are they?
Oh my God, I hate the colored ones. They're so tacky. I would recommend a tiny, tiny violin to a child because that's the right size for them. But I remember I never did it because I was too afraid to. But I remember like kids in my year who were learning violin, and they'd put stickers on their violin. And because they had like a student violin, it was fine to do so, and using like stickers on their bows so they could figure out like the upper half and the lower half of the bow they put stickers on. But yeah, for a child, I think it's just about making it as fun, turning it into games as much as possible. I did teach at one point for a very short period of time, and I had this, I think she was 6 or 7 when I was teaching her, this little student, and we used to turn everything into a game because I think her mum wanted her to learn the violin more than she wanted to learn the violin. And I was just there to do my job. So I just try to make it as fun and engaging for her as much as possible, because that's what my dad does with his students. He just makes it engaging for them. And I think the type of violin doesn't matter. Like if they want to start on a colored violin, that's up to them. I think at one point I wanted a purple violin, but I'm so glad I never went there.
Do you thinking of changing your style of violin to something to upgrade your violin? Or are you going to keep that one for a while?
I think I'll keep it for a while. The Chippewa Voyom, I think, is like a lifelong violin. I love that instrument so much. It's such a beautiful sound, and it's a professional instrument. So I feel like I can get a lot of longevity out of it. With my spur, it's hard to say because I haven't been around for a long time. I don't know how they go in terms of longevity, but it's not uncommon for someone to have multiple instruments to choose from. And I've spoken to Paul about potentially having another spur because he makes another series of spurs that have a slightly different sound. They're made with different material. And I think there'd be a time and a place for that sort of instrument as well. But I think, so what I have with me here, I've only got 3 instruments here. I've got my traditional violin, my spur, and my viola. But back home with my parents, we've got 3 student violins that I grew up with, including Big Red and Fidelio. And I think I had an electric violin, which was one of those ones that's just the outline, that I think was just a very quick purchase when I was in high school, and I hated it so much. It was a terrible instrument. It's like $300. Like it sounded like a $300 violin. It wasn't very good at all. And I've upgraded a lot through that time, but I think now becoming a professional musician, I've found my instruments that work for me, and I've never felt like I needed to upgrade my traditional violin, which is a beautiful instrument. But my spur, I don't know. We'll see. I guess it depends on like the journey. If something, God forbid, ever happened to them, or if my style of playing or my style of performance ever changes, I might get another electric violin one day, like the outlined ones, but we'll see. I don't know. I don't love them, but I know that it's easier to market that style of performance with an instrument like that.
Why are violins so expensive?
I think it all just depends on what goes into them. So it's important to know that the more expensive a violin is doesn't make it better than any other instrument. One of my student violins that I had, so I had a KG instrument, which that's just the brand. It was a $900 instrument. and that did me well through high school. And there were other instruments that we looked at that were like in the $3,000, $4,000 mark, and they
Whoa.
didn't sound as good to the kg. So
Oh my goodness.
I mean, like my spur is about $4,000, $5,000, but my traditional violin is much, much more than that.
Yeah, what do you think of the Stradivarius?
Oh my God, instruments. Like, oh, they're just amazing instruments. They're just, $250,000, $500,000.
I think the Stradivarius is
I think it's $250,000.
Wait, violin, most expensive violin in capture. Yeah. So the Guarneri del Gesù instrument is now the most expensive violin in the world, selling for an estimated 16 million. Its new owner anonymously donated the historical instrument to a violinist Anne Akiko Myers on loan for the rest of her life. You ever heard of Anne Akiko Myers? She's a well-known violinist.
No, I haven't. I think there's a Stradivarius that is estimated at like 20 million. The Strad is more expensive. Yeah, so Stradivarius violins also they cost between 8 million and 20 million, and there's not many of them.
Who would play that? I mean, who would play a $16 million violin?
Very, very, very lucky.
Drop that thing, you're screwed.
Oh my God, can you imagine? Oh, I would be too scared to move. I'd be like, I don't want to. I'd be too scared to be in the same room as it. Like, it would just be like, wow.
I know.
But I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong. I may have completely misheard it, but I think that the most expensive violin, it's unplayable though, is the one that went down with the Titanic, because it's like the history that went with it.
So yeah, everyone usually plays the violin with their right hand. How easy it is to play with your left hand?
No, there's no one on this earth that would make a violin for a left-handed person.
That's too bad, because if I were to learn a violin, I'd be doing it in the left hand.
But you know what? You do more with your left hand than your right hand. There's like more, because your left hand does all the fingering. So your right hand does the bowing. Like your left is doing more stuff, more work. But I know so many people growing up. I know so many left-handed violinists. But the thing is, if you think about it, because it sits on your left shoulder while you're playing, if you're sitting in an orchestra and everyone's violin is going the same direction, and then you're sitting there with a left-handed violin, your scrolls will be hitting each other. So no one will want to sit next to you in an orchestra because you're facing the wrong way.
Well, I'm left-handed, so I would definitely need to use the bow in my left hand. I find it more comfortable when I don't play the violin, but if I were, I'd have to learn with the left hand, because I'm ambidextrous, but there are some things I just can't do with the right hand. That's the issue.
Interesting. I feel like you'd be even better at violin if you're ambidextrous.
I don't know, like when I putting the bow in this hand, and I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Do the bow in my left hand does feel more comfortable. But just to screw everyone up and say, hey, I'm going to play the violin with the left hand, when I was playing tennis, there was only one girl in our whole tennis club that played tennis with her left hand.
Wow.
Not the right hand.
But that's okay. Like, you can play with both hands.
But like I said, if I were to play the violin, I'd have to learn with my left hand, actually. Yeah, you got a lot of accolades here. Do you play at children's parties?
I've played a first birthday, but it was not in the way that you probably imagine it. It was an Albanian first birthday, and it was also a baptism. The kid was asleep the whole time. It was mainly for the adults. They had a DJ, a saxophone player, myself, and a Brazilian drummer and Brazilian dancers. And there were barely any kids there. So I've done kids events, but the kids events that I've done have been more for the adults, which is so funny because it's like that's for an Albanian first birthday. I've got an Afghan one coming up. They've got like 500 or 600 people going to be there, and no one's there for the kid. They're all there for the food and the music. Like that's what it is with even the weddings. Like because at these sort of events, the music is so loud. You don't go to socialize. You go to dance and sing and drink and eat. But yeah, it's funny. Like children's entertainment. Yeah, I've done a few, but it's always for the adults. But I've had so many like different situations where kids have like come up to me during the performance, and they're so fascinated by what I'm doing, and they sit there and they just watch me, and I love that. I love performing to little children. I always kneel down to them and perform to them because and I've had someone message me, like the parent of a child, say like, hey, thank you so much for playing to our little boy. He just said that he wants to start learning the violin. Like I've had messages like that after an event, which is the best thing in the world. I love that.
How did the pandemic affect you?
So it's because I hadn't really started my business before lockdown. It kind of boded well, but so I'll explain. So I graduated from uni from the Conservatorium in December 2019, sorry. And then 3 months later, we went into lockdown, at least here in Melbourne. And in that time, I'd already made the decision to take a break from violin because, in all honesty, uni sucked my soul dry. I just wasn't enjoying it. Anything creative at uni at least here in Australia, and I've heard this in so many occasions, like you're not really given the freedom to be creative. You're given you're told how to be and what to do. And I just didn't enjoy university. Like uni to me was less about the violin and more about character building and dealing with difficult people. And to be honest, I'm grateful for those situations because I dealt with some very difficult staff members in my time at uni, which taught me a lot about people and dealing with people in this industry, and that's fine. I became a better violinist. I had a great teacher when I was there, but it wasn't like it was a mixture of, I think I got a lot out of it in a different way than I expected to. But coming out of uni, I just wanted to take a break from the violin because I couldn't associate happiness with it as much as I wanted to. So going into lockdown, I decided to focus more on my health, and sort of after uni, I just wasn't at my healthiest. So I was like focusing on my health and fitness and that sort of thing. And that was like the theme through lockdown for me. But when I decided last April, so 2 years later, a year and a half later, when I decided that I wanted to start my business in the wedding and event space, that's when it sort of worked really well for me because we're coming out of basically a 2-year lockdown where so many weddings had been postponed, and people were looking for entertainment. And of course, starting a wedding in the entertainment and event space after lockdown, there was just so much work for me. There were 2.4 million weddings here in Australia this year alone. This year, so honestly, lockdown and the pandemic boded well for me. I had a few weddings that were booked through the year last year, but we just kept going into lockdown. And then we had our last lockdown at the start of November. So I had maybe 3 weddings that were postponed, but most of my clients who booked me in, they'd booked with me from at their 3rd or 4th postponement. So they'd postponed a few times, but I hadn't been postponed with them. So it kind of helped me more than it didn't. If that makes sense.
I see what you mean, and I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate how genuine and honest you are, and I really enjoyed this podcast.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Not really sure when this is going to be posted, but I really enjoyed it, and I thought that you were so passionate about what you did, and and passionate playing of violin, and thank you for showing it. So let's say goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Now just stay behind because I want to talk to you.
No, it's all good.
Bye.
Bye.